Again, for those who may not have met Dr. Nafisa, she is very special to me for many reasons. First of all, let's just put it out there. She's my first cousin. So we go way, way, way back. She's known me ever since I was born. But she's also very special in that she's a personal mentor, a really dear friend, someone I have benefited so much from for as long as I can remember, because mashallah tabarakallah, she's always been a fountain of knowledge. And I don't say that to in any way embarrass her, but just to be truthful, to be honest. She's impacted my life, and many of our family and friends that know her just absolutely love her because she's a giver. She's always, has so much knowledge to give and share. And so back in 2009, and as you can tell, she has a doctorate in front of her because she's a clinical psychologist. So Dr. Nafisa, she was practicing here in the Bay Area in, with non-Muslim clients, Muslim clients. And she had this brilliant idea because, at that time I was working also in the Muslim community. And so she just said, listen, there's, a lot of things that are still stigmatized in the Muslim community that need to be addressed as far as mental health is concerned. How about we join forces and come up with something that we can offer the community, and where it gives both the clinical perspective and the Islamic perspective. And we can really do a lot of great work. And mashallah, she had, again, the foresight. So I was like, that sounds amazing. And very soon after, mental health for the number 4, the numerical number 4 Muslims was created. And we created this website where basically we took head on, whatever topics that we both were hearing about in the community, or just obviously were relevant in terms of mental health. And we started to write about it from a clinical and Islamic psychology, I guess you could call it, perspective. And a lot of great articles came out of that. Mashallah, we got contacted, and Nafisa personally, from many of her professional contacts as well, was contacted by people who were using our material to help with their Muslim clients. So it was just it's a labor of love that we both, mashallah, put a lot of heart and soul into it. And so I invited her today because, alhamdulillah, we wrote an article that ended up, and we, every year we kind of would write an would write a post on the website about our most viral articles. And I think, Nafis, you can correct me, this was like many years, this was always the top one, right? In terms of how viral it went, correct?
Not only the top one for us, but the top article for Muslim Village, for a lot of other Islamic sites. So a lot of people were using it and posting it and finding it to be the most popular. Yes.
Alhamdulillah. And so that's why I invited her to come and join me on the stage, because the topic is obviously very relevant. Those of us on Clubhouse know that there's probably a marriage room every single day on this app. And you see a lot of people struggling, who are either single or divorced, or, just in a situation where they are looking to get married, but we acknowledge that there's a crisis in our community. And there's a lot of great, speakers who talk on this. But because we wrote this article, and just last week, I believe it was, we actually had an incident on Instagram where someone sent me or tagged me on a post on Instagram. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, whoa, that's amazing. It was, this happens online, unfortunately, but someone basically took all of our content from this article, created an Instagram post out of it, and didn't give us any credit, no citation, nothing. And then, mashallah, it was a very, very popular page, almost 1 million followers, whatever. And then many other pages, because of that, big page, started reposting the same exact post. And so it went again viral again. I was like, okay, maybe this is a sign, and maybe there'll be some good in bringing Nafisa on the stage here in Clubhouse and addressing this. And I know it's early, and for those who follow the other classes I do, this is kind of not the normal time, but mashallah, we have to work with our esteemed guest here, and this is a good time for her. So I'm very honored, and I'm so happy to see all of you here. I thank you for being here. Please do me a favor, follow follow the club, obviously, because I want you to be a part of the club, inshallah, but also follow Nafisa, because she does incredible work. She has she has a podcast, and I'd love for you to maybe share with the audience what you're doing right now, Nafisa, so people can know about you, how to find you. And then we'll get into this topic where we're going to go through this article that we wrote. And at the end, we'll leave it for Q&A. So inshallah, we do want to hear from you, but we want to first go through the article and kind of address some of the issues that we've noticed in our, experience. and then we'll get to the Q&A. So Nafis, can you tell the audience here on Clubhouse more about what you're doing, how to find you, how to connect with you? What are the top programs that I know, because mashallah, you have classes that you're always giving, and you have packages, you have a bunch of stuff. So you go ahead and take it from here and let our audience know more about you.
You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Nafisa Sekandari, but I'm at Dr._Nafisa_Sekandari. On Instagram. I'm also on Facebook, and I have a YouTube channel that I'm trying to put a lot of these videos on so that people can watch. But I do have a podcast that I started in January called The Mental Health Break, where I interview professionals from different fields that talk about mental health related issues, and they give really practical advice. I've had the pleasure and opportunity to meet some amazing people that have shared some amazing information. So you can follow the Mental Health Break podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, on all your favorite platforms. And then also at transforminganxiety.com/podcast, you can find more information. And if you need to know more information about me, going to transforminganxiety.com, you'll get the podcast and then all the courses as well.
Awesome. And just for those, again, who are in Clubhouse right now, please do click on Dr. Nafisa's profile, scroll all the way to the bottom, and you'll see her Instagram handle right there. And then from there, you can check out all of her amazing episodes. We were just speaking about one of her episodes recently. She's actually put some of the, I think, the best content, and I don't say that lightly, because she addresses, it's a holistic. There's talks that are very, geared towards things that are very relevant to all of us. I mean, anxiety, but also physical well-being, mental well-being. Obviously, this is her field, but she comes from a very holistic approach. And even the people that she invites to speak are incredibly engaging. They're just really interesting podcasts. So I invite all of you to please check out her page, follow her on Instagram, and then look into, especially if you are dealing with anxiety and you don't have access to mental health, a practitioner or a therapist. There's barriers to service a lot of times in our community, but here she has a class where you can, it's paid for, and then you can just follow the recommendations, as according to your own schedule. So you don't have to worry about that as well. But I do encourage you all to continue to follow her, inshallah, and benefit from her. And the room is Mizan, which I hope all of you are following. But the topic for today is 10 ways to avoid marrying the wrong person. And what is this? This is, if you see, it's in quotations because it's the name of an article, actually, that Dr. Nafisa and I wrote back in 2010 that ended up being our most viral, article ever written on our website, but also for many other Muslim websites who reproduced our article with permission, mashallah. They also announced that this was their most viral post as well. And so we wanted to use the article as as a guide to have this discussion. We've addressed this on Clubhouse, I know, in many rooms, but I still think it's important topic, and we shouldn't shy away from further talking about it, which is the marriage crisis in our community and a lot of the unfortunate problems that the singles are having, but also people who've been married before, just the stigmas that are still unfortunate in our community. So we wanted to empower people who are thinking about marriage to really address certain specific questions in their pursuit of marriage to avoid falling into relationships that could prove to be fruitless at the end. And so this is where the article comes in. So now what I'd like to do is we're going to go ahead and read from the article. It's a similar format, right? If you've attended any of my classes, you know that I read from text and then we do commentary. So I'm going to actually read from the article itself and talk about, because it's it's a list. So there's 10 ways. The article, again, is 10 ways to avoid marrying the wrong person. So we'll go one by one, and then we'll have some commentary back and forth, because, again, I'd love for Dr. Nafisa to share some of her reflections and experiences working with clients, or just what she's witnessed in the community. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into it. So the article starts off, there's a right way and a wrong way to get to know someone for marriage. The wrong way is to get caught up in the excitement and nuance of a budding relationship, and in the process, completely forget to ask the critical questions that help determine compatibility. One of the biggest mistakes that many young Muslims make is rushing into marriage without properly and thoroughly getting to know someone. A common myth is that the duration of a courtship is an accurate enough measure of how compatible two people are. So this idea that if someone's been talking, or a couple has been talking for a year or 2 years, that's, or even 6 months, that indicates compatibility. But that's not necessarily always the case, because it's not just a matter of duration of how long they've been in touch or communicating or with this intention to get married, but also the substance of what they're talking about, right? The substance matters. If you are just socializing, which is what we now refer to as halal dating, right? A lot of couples are engaging in halal dating, going out with friends and family, going to the movies, going out to dinner, having experiences, right? Then when are these really serious conversations happening? And if they are they happening independently? Or are there, maybe other chaperones or people that are around that make, it difficult sometimes to get into really, intimate in a sense of not private and inappropriate, but intimate in the sense of really critical questions, right? It's difficult sometimes because people are around, and so you want to kind of keep the conversation light. But if that's the bulk of your interactions, or you're just swept away with the emotions, because that's obviously very natural. It's exciting. Let's be honest. All of us who are married and who've been through this before know that it is so exciting to talk to someone and connect with them, and you get butterflies. This goes for both genders, by the way. But men can get nervous too, right? Talking about marriage with someone. But there's a lot of excitement around, the whole prospect of that you're talking to someone. There's attraction. There's all that tension, right? There's all those very visceral, physical reactions that are normal. But if they dominate the conversation and we're not actually having critical conversations, then what happens is we have a false sense of security, right? The excitement of the relationship makes you feel secure in that relationship. And that is probably in my experience, one of the biggest reasons why so many people, after the marriage and after, the wedding, I should say, after the wedding and a lot of the initial, that honeymoon phase starts to fizzle, then things start to get real serious, because the excitement phases. As with anything, we're human beings, right? We are creatures of habit. And so part of that comes with this, this thing that where as soon as nuance loses, or we lose that nuance for something, we lose excitement for it. And that can absolutely happen in a relationship. So the point being here, that duration of talking to someone is not necessarily an accurate indicator of whether or not that relationship is healthy or going to be successful. It is about, what did you talk about? Did you actually address the most serious questions? Like, where do you want to live, permanently? Like, what's your idea? Do you plan to move at any point? Because if you're not asking that question, I will tell you right now, that has absolutely, caught many people, unfortunately, not in a good way, by surprise, and really devastated the relationship, because that debate of wait, this was never part of the plan. Well, you never asked. Well, I didn't know that you wanted to move here, or you wanted to move back with your parents, or you wanted to move whatever. Questions like that. But anyway, I don't want to get too derailed here. So this is the introduction to this article that we wrote, which is asking critical questions. Now, the very first point that we make here is, do not marry potential. And oh my gosh, I have so much to say on this, but I'll read the little commentary we have, and then I'd love for Dr. Nafisa to chime in on this important point. So oftentimes men consider marrying a woman hoping she never changes, while a woman considers marrying a man she hopes she can change. This is the wrong approach on both accounts. Don't assume that you can change a person after you're married to them, or that they will reach their potential. There is no guarantee, after all, that those changes will be for the better. In fact, it's often for the worse. If you cannot accept someone or imagine living with them as they are, then simply don't marry them. These differences can include a number of things, such as ideological or practical differences in religion, habits, hygiene, communication skills, etc. And I think what I meant ideological, I meant more creedal, right? Creedal or practical differences. This was written 10 years ago, so I should have edited some of this. But anyway, so yeah, that's what I meant there. So creedal or practical differences in your faith practice, habits, hygiene. We can get into the nitty gritty of how this can play out. But basically, if there's things about this person that you're interested in that are fundamental to you and that are really important to you, and you're thinking that maybe with time this person can change, it's a recipe for disaster. So I'm going to stop there and ask Dr. Nafisa to please give some commentary here on this point, and then we'll just continue from there. So Dr. Nafisa, what do you have to say about this first point, do not marry potential?
Well, one of the reasons I'm hearing an echo. One of the reasons that I really wanted to write this back in 2000, this is one of our earliest articles. And this actually, I wanted to give credit to the person that we adapted this from. This is such a universal message because it applies not just to Muslims, it applies to all religions. And the person that wrote this was a Jewish rabbi. Let me see, by the name of Rabbi Dov Heller. And so he had sent back in 2005 or 6 or 7, when people were sending those letters to everybody, and we were sending chain letters basically of all these articles that we were like, this is before Facebook, this is before we could share articles on social media. And so I remember somebody had sent this article that somebody had written, and it had some really good points. And we thought, this is a really good article to adapt to the Muslim community. But as we've seen, this has been the #1 article, for a lot of Muslim sites, but it reached over 1 million people on Huffington Post in the United Kingdom. And so this relates, all the information we're sharing here is not just for Muslims. It relates to every religion, because in my practice, I see patients that are looking to get married. There are a lot of wonderful, amazing women that are just wanting to find the right person and have a healthy relationship. And they date repeatedly all these men that are toxic for them, but they're like, but he has such good potential. He is studying to be X, Y, and Z, or he comes from a really good family, or he looks really good on paper. He makes a lot of money. Like, for example, I can share this one person that it was dating this man that had a really good job. He was making a lot of money. He came from a very wealthy family. And in the beginning, it was all amazing. He paid a lot of attention to her. And then all of a sudden, he only could see her on a Thursday, because Friday, Saturday, and Sunday he wanted for himself so he could play video games. He would only take her out every once in a while because he didn't want to spend a lot of money and waste too much money on whatever. He didn't want to waste money. Even though he was wealthy, he was very cheap and stingy with his finances. So everything, like Husi was saying, as far as not the length of time that you're dating is not an indication of how close you're going to be. You need to also look for the red flags. And that's what this article really focuses on. Find the red flags that are not necessarily always about you. It's about how are they treating other people, which we'll get into later. But the #1 thing, a lot of women, like Hosai was saying in the beginning, a man marries a woman hoping she never changes. A woman marries a man hoping that she could change him. If you've ever seen this movie called The Joy Luck Club, I ended up watching it again last night. The Joy Luck Club is about these Asians in America that are just navigating life. And one of the women in there marries a white man that is very wealthy. And so she feels like she has to, like, because the mom gives her a talk before they get married, basically saying, we're a very wealthy family. My son is going to be a very well-known architect or engineer or whatever he was. And so he needs to mingle with a certain crowd, and he needs to be with somebody that's going to elevate his status. And so she gets this message in her head that she has to be less Asian. She has to be less than who she is. She has to always wait on him hand and foot. So it shows over the years, she ends up making herself less and less and essentially becoming kind of like a servant to him. And he loses respect for her, and their marriage falls apart because he finds this woman that speaks her mind. She says what she needs to say, and that's what attracted him to her. But over the years, she changes and becomes less than who she is. And so he's like, I just want to hear your opinion. I want to hear who you are. I want to see the person that you were when I first met you. And she finally, after they broke up and her mom gives her some advice, she becomes who she was supposed to be back. She finds her voice. And so that's what really reconnected them again. And I want people to understand that as women, we hear the same message from our cultures. I don't know, Osei, if you can agree with me on this, but I think this is universal. A lot of women do this regardless of what the background is. we become less than once we find somebody, once we find somebody that we think we need to be with. We feel like we have to make ourselves so small in order for them to accept us and approve of us. And we don't end up using our voice. But at the same time, we think, oh, but if he has the potential to be X, Y, and Z, that's who he's going to be, or I'm going to change him somehow to fit the mold that I want him to fit into. So before going on, I know this is going to take forever if we go have a long discussion over every topic, but that one I feel like is the most important, and this is why we put that as number one.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I've seen the exact same thing play out. And I think this actually speaks to a phenomenon that happens oftentimes in our respective cultures, where young girls are encouraged to marry early because there's this fear that if you move past a certain age, I should say, then you're no longer marriage potential. And so a lot of times family will push young girls to marry, in their late, sometimes teens or early 20s, right after college. And so she hasn't yet fully, come into her own, right? Because we know, and you can maybe speak more on this from a clinical perspective, but late adolescence for some people doesn't end until mid 20s, right? It can go on. And so if you're having someone marry early and they haven't yet matured, even in their own physiology, they haven't come into that, come into their own, then she's still evolving. And that can obviously cause problems because, and then, example you just gave, a man is marrying someone young for whatever reasons, some biological imperative or cultural imperative that forces him to think I have to marry young, thinking that this person is going to stay the same, not realizing that you are marrying someone who is still trying to forge her own identity. So she likely will have an evolution. And is that going to cause problems in the relationship? Oftentimes, yes, because I have absolutely seen women who are minimized and as you said, or who minimize themselves in the earlier part of their marriage because they are so afraid of losing the relationship or not making a good enough impression on the man or his family, that by the time she, goes through that natural maturation, especially when children come into the play, then she comes into her own and she's very transformed because there's an empowerment that happens to women. And I can speak on this. Alhamdulillah, we're both mothers. We both have this experience, but anyone who's a mother knows that children absolutely bring a strength, or they can absolutely bring a strength to a woman because you've been through something so life altering that your whole, there's a rewiring that happens and a total overhaul almost in terms of your chemistry and your way of thinking. So that can also bring a lot of strength in terms of a woman's personality. And that can be for some men intimidating if they are not prepared for that. So I think this speaks to just this issue of age, a timing. Are we thinking about these things on this level where we really are looking for partners who have had time to grow into their own, or are we allowing some other fear or some other impulse push us into relationships based on these arbitrary, things like age and what have you, not thinking that these things will likely come into play. So I agree. This is a very important point about not marrying potential. And I'm going to speak specifically to the young girls here that as someone, and I'm very open about my experience. And those of you who know me and have heard me speak, I've spoken plenty of times here on Clubhouse and in other events as well. I was that girl who married early. I'm the, one of three sisters and the youngest, and I married first in my family, which is very oftentimes in our cultures, you go through age. So the eldest get married first, but I kind of flipped the script. And for me, it was more religious reasons. I was conditioned at that time to think that this is what my purpose was, to be married and to have children. Alhamdulillah, and whatever, it's all qadar Allah wa ma sha fa'al. No, we don't ever, we're not displeased with the decree of Allah. So I have no regrets of my trajectory. But I will say, as a cautionary tale, now, because I've lived it, that I really do think young girls should wait until at least they have come into an identity that is from a place of conviction, of strength. And this is why I teach about emotional intelligence, because if you go through that, evolution from the Islamic perspective anyway, of really knowing yourself, knowing your deen, knowing your rights as a woman, knowing who you are, that you are created by God to serve him, and that everything else is secondary or tertiary, you will have a very strong identity of who you are. I did not have that identity. I was still being molded and learning, but I unfortunately, again, not unfortunately, it was al qadr, but I went into that place of marriage thinking that that was a big part of my identity. And it was only after living my experience that I realized my most important identity is as an independent, free-thinking, God-serving woman. That is what I need to cultivate. And then everything else will fall into place. And that took time. But I do encourage anyone in their early 20s to just think about these things and to really work on yourself and make sure your deen is very solid. And that's not to say don't entertain or meet people for the purpose of marriage, but don't be rushed is what I want to say. Don't feel this rush, this pressure that many of our cultures and families put on us, because you want to not only be married, but you want to be successful in your marriage. And you have to prioritize yourself first in order to bring, and we talked about this actually in another article, Dr. Nafisa, if you remember, where actually it might be in this one as well, where we don't come to marriage with these Hollywood, Bollywood ideas of like marriage completes me. No, you should come as a whole person, and your partner should come as a whole person, and both of you together are completing a union, but you're not coming hoping that your partner is going to complete the rest of you. That's the idea that we get a lot from these films and this, this romanticizing marriage, which of course, it's an emotional thing. But if we're looking at it in those terms, then we're really shortchanging ourselves. You should come to it complete as a human, or at least close to that as much as possible. And so should your potential partner. And that is what this is about potential. Do not marry potential. So alhamdulillah, a lot to say on this. And I'm sure there are thoughts swirling around in the audience as well, which inshallah, for those of you who are entering, just a quick reset. Thank you for being here. We will get to questions towards the end where we have a lot to cover. So let's go ahead and move to the second point of the article. For those, again, who are joining us, we are reading from an article that Dr. Nafisa and I co-wrote back in 2010 called 10 Ways to Avoid Marrying the Wrong Person. It was our most viral article. Alhamdulillah, it went millions and millions of views everywhere worldwide, republished by many sites, including Huffington Post. Thank you for reminding me of that, Dr. Nafisa. So this is now the second point in the article, which is choose character over chemistry. So while chemistry and attraction are no doubt important, character precedes them both. A famous quote follows, "Chemistry ignites the fire, but character keeps it burning." The idea of falling in love should never be the sole reason for marrying someone. It is very easy to confuse infatuation and lust for love. The most important character traits to look for include humility, kindness, responsibility, and happiness. And here's a breakdown of each trait. So what is humility? A humble person never makes demands of people, but rather always does right by them. They put their values and principles above convenience and comfort. They are slow to anger, are modest, and avoid materialism. Kindness. The kind person is the quintessential giver. They seek to please and minimize the pain of others. To know if a person is a giver, observe how they treat their family, siblings, and parents. Do they have gratitude towards their parents for all that they've done for them? If not, then know that they will never appreciate what you do for them. How do they treat people they don't have to be kind towards? For example, people in the service industry, right? How do they spend their money? How do they deal with anger, their own anger, and their reaction to someone else's anger? And then responsibility. A responsible person has stability in their finances, relationships, job, character, etc. You can rely on this person and trust what they say if they're responsible. And then happiness. A happy person is content. So when we say happiness, we have to equate it here to contentment, right? With their portion in life, that God has given them a certain portion of health, wealth, well-being, all of the advantages and privileges that we have. And they are content with God's decree and about their life. And they focus on what they have rather than on what they don't have. And they don't complain. So people who are content are grateful. They're in a state of abundance. They're in a state of gratitude to God. They do not look with the eye of envy towards other people or complain about what they don't have. So these are really important points. So Dr. Nafisa, what would you like to add to the second point about the importance of choosing character over chemistry?
So I specialize in anxiety-based disorders, and a lot of my patients come to me because they're struggling with maintaining relationships and finding the right person. And the one thing I suggest for every single one is, when you have anxiety, or even if you don't have anxiety, you need somebody that's going to be reliable and consistent. And that means that they say what they mean and mean what they say. They don't play games. They don't lie to you. They don't say one thing and then they're flaky about things, because for somebody that has anxiety, that is going to trigger you over and over again. You will never find peace and happiness with a person like this, because you need somebody that's consistent and means what they say and says what they mean, because that's going to reduce your anxiety level. You can feel calm around them. You can trust what they're saying. And so all of that is really important for my patients that have anxiety, but I think it applies to all of us. Kindness is one of the most important traits that you can find in a person, because if they're kind to an animal or to a stranger or to the busboy or to the waiter or whatever, then you're going to see that kindness applied to other areas of their life. I have a patient that treats herself like she's the source of the problem. I've been seeing her for many years, and every time she comes to me with a relationship, it seems to be the same pattern. She keeps finding these guys that lie to her constantly, and it triggers her anxiety and makes her enraged, and she ends up losing control of herself. But instead of realizing that she keeps attracting the wrong guys, she keeps thinking it's her. Why can't I make this relationship work? Because I'm ready for marriage. I keep meeting all these guys, not realizing they all have the same thing in common. They lie to her. They mess with her mind. They gaslight her, and make her seem like she's the one with the issue. I know that Hosai and I did a live a couple of years ago, I believe, about narcissistic personality disorder. And so paying attention to number 2 really will help you avoid getting into relationships like that, because you will pay attention to the red flags and not fall for somebody. Because one of the traits of a narcissistic personality disorder person is that they will love bomb you. They will make you feel like you're the most amazing person on the planet, while at the same time isolating you from your whole social circle. They will isolate you from your family. And then they don't have good relationships with their friends. They don't have good relationships with their family members. And so those are the things to pay attention to. You might feel really special at that time. You're like, oh, but he loves me and he thinks I'm the most amazing person. So his family must be the problem. His friends must be the problem. You need to pay attention to that. That is so important, to make sure that character is the most important thing, instead of looking for that chemistry, because Hollywood again lies to us that our toes are supposed to curl when we're around this person. We're supposed to have butterflies in our stomach when we're around this person. But actually, the number one predictor of a lasting relationship is being calm around a person that you meet. You feel like you've come home. You feel like you're safe with them. Not you have butterflies and you're nervous and you're afraid to speak and you have no voice, and this person triggers your anxiety. That's not butterflies. So you need to pay attention to that.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Nafisa. Very important points. And I hope everyone here again is taking notes. And we just want to make clear here that all of the advice that we're giving here applies, by the way, to both, right? Sometimes because we're both women and we work a lot with women, we may sound as though these are only issues that women have to deal with. But no, men also have to look out for character inconsistencies. If the woman you're speaking with is in any way, not consistent in the way that she treats you or treats other people or speaks about other people, these are also red flags to consider, because character is, as we look to the Prophet ﷺ, for example, we learn by following his sunnah that a truly good character is something that is consistent. We don't have this idea of duplicity or showing different faces to different people. A person who is truthful and honest and stable is going to present that way to everyone in their life, in their social circles and in their private life and at work. You're not going to have major differences where it's like, whoa, I didn't expect that. So if you get to a point in your relationship talking to anyone, whether you're male or female, where they just are behaving in a way that really makes you question your own mind, I would certainly say that's a red flag, because you should feel, as Dr. Nafisa pointed, calm and just a sense of predictability almost, but a sense of calmness around that person, not where they are making you question your own again, sanity. So really important point there. So we'll go ahead and continue again. For those who are joining, we are reading from an article called 10 Ways to Avoid Marrying the Wrong Person. If you'd like, you can do a search and read along with us, but we ask that you put in mental health for Muslims so that you can read our article from our site, because a lot of people have reproduced it, and we revamped our website. So in the search results, we come up sort of towards the end, but you see a bunch of other websites that have replicated our article coming up first. But anyway, that's fine, as long as you're reading along. But we're on now point number 3, and this is: do not neglect the emotional needs of your partner. So both men and women have emotional needs. And in order for a partnership to be successful, those needs must be mutually met. The fundamental emotional need of a woman is to be loved. The fundamental emotional need of a man is to be respected and appreciated. That doesn't mean that women don't want to be respected and appreciated, or men don't want to be loved. We're just speaking in terms of fundamentals here. So I wanted to put that out there. To make a woman feel loved, we want to give her what we call the 3 A's, okay? Attention, like AAA, okay, not the insurance. Well, actually, it is a form of insurance, I guess. If you give her the AAA's, you'll be insured in your relationship. Attention, affection, and appreciation. So there, we've included appreciation there as a form of love. And, we can talk more about love languages, but in a nutshell, these are the things that a man, for the brothers in the audience listening, or the men who've joined us, you want to pay attention to. Are you giving enough attention, affection, and appreciation to the woman in your life that you are speaking to, or that you are pursuing for marriage? And then to make a man feel loved, you want to give him the 3 R's, right? Which are respect, reassurance, and relief. Okay, so again, this goes, all across the board. I'm sure a holistic, a comprehensive understanding, all of these would qualify in what both genders need, right? But we're just kind of giving some more specific details in terms of the fundamental needs, so that we can focus, right? So it is the obligation of each partner to make sure that the other is happy, and this extends to intimacy as well. So in a partnership, obviously in a marriage, it's a conditional relationship. You are there to give, right, and receive as well. And so if you're only receiving and you're not willing to give, then clearly it's going to affect the relationship. So you have to look at what are the needs of my partner, and in this case, this is the breakdown for each, right? And I'm sure subjectively there may be more, but at least we should be doing this as baseline, right? So as long as each partner is fulfilled by the emotional needs of the other, the intimate relationship will thrive. When a man takes seriously the emotional needs of his wife, she will feel more encouraged to fulfill his sexual desires. Likewise, when a woman takes seriously the emotional needs of her husband, he will feel more encouraged to give her the affection, love, and appreciation she wants from him. Working together in this way encourages both giving and receiving. So again, this is a complementary, part of the relationship. They go hand in hand. We both, both men and women need intimacy. We both need affection. We both need these things, but we have to work in concert with each other. We have to be able to preempt and see what the needs are and meet those needs before we start making demands and expecting, because this is again going back to our belief, right? In our belief as Muslims, we do have this idea of want, right, for the other what you want for yourself, and so the giving part precedes. You give first. We're people who should be generous, and then the reciprocity happens. But a lot of times, unfortunately, people are very demanding in relationships, and they want things first, and then based on what they get, it's a condition of how much they're willing to give. This is not going to work, especially if both of you are doing the same thing. Then it's like the chicken and the egg. Who's going to go first? Who's going to break that first? If you're both standing in your respective corners waiting for the other one to act, or the other one to do something for you to act, and then you're reacting to it, it just doesn't make sense. But if you actually lead with giving, and that's the culture that you create in your relationship, which is one of giving, then each person will be meeting the needs of the other and fulfilling their obligations. So it's a really important point to address. So Dr. Nafisa, what would you like to add to that part of the list here?
So one of the things that comes up to mind when you say all of that is this book called Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man by Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey from, what is it?
The Family
What's that?
Feud?
The Family Feud, yes.
Yeah.
Steve Harvey from Family Feud. So he, I never thought, he doesn't, because he's a comedian, he doesn't come across to me as somebody that's so wise and has a lot of good things to say, but he's written several books on relationships. One of them was turned into a movie called Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man. And that's one of the things he talks about, that men and women have different needs. Their love languages, as you would say, are different, and men need to feel like men, and we need to make them feel like men instead of feeling like a lot of women feel like I need to do everything and not really trouble him. And so then he feels like he has no place in our relationship. We make our own money now. We can hire somebody to fix the problems that are falling apart in our places, in our house or whatever, our cars. Literally and a lot of people get really offended when a guy opens the door or waits for them or walks a certain way on the sidewalk, and they think, oh, that's, I can do this myself. I don't need help. I don't need protection. But we're literally taking that responsibility away from a man, and a man needs to feel needed, wanted, and wants to protect. They have that need. They have that biological need. And so we really need to understand more what men, the role that they play, because a lot of them are complaining, like, what am I in this relationship for? She can do everything. She can do whatever. She can buy stuff for herself. She can provide for herself. What role do I play? And we don't know how to allow them to be men. I remember I got it lectured, I guess, because my dad has raised us to be very independent and to do things for ourselves. And so I remember somebody at work was helping me with something, and my natural instinct, because as a kid, I was always going and helping my dad whenever he was doing something. My natural instinct was to go and do something to help him. I don't know, something was wrong with my car, and this was a long time ago when he was trying to fix something. And my natural instinct was to go over there and do everything. He's like, just let me do this. Let me be a man and let me do this. And I was like, that was such a huge lesson for me. And so when I heard about this book, it made a lot of sense. And then that's why we actually included all that in this article as well, because that is so true. We need to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our partners, but also not feeling like we're not worthy. Again, the Joy Luck Club is full of so many lessons when it comes to relationships, because a lot of those women learned that they weren't worthy, so they didn't speak up for what they needed. And so also not only meeting the needs of your partner, but also asking for what you need and being able to speak up and feeling worthy of asking to be treated with kindness and respect and getting your emotional needs met. It's a responsibility for both partners.
I love that point. I'm so glad you brought that up, because again, when you go back to if we were doing things in the most ideal way, especially from an Islamic perspective, we would be doing a lot of preparation for both young men and women before they even talk about, marriage, on working on these qualities of, like you said, being empowered to speak up, to know what one's needs are, to know how to voice those needs, and to not shy away from doing that. But we're not doing that, unfortunately. We're not empowering our youth. So what happens is they're kind of thrown into these relationships, or at least into the need for a relationship, because obviously we're sentient, we're emotional creatures. We need a companionship. So there's this, again, biological impulse to be with someone that can overwhelm someone. But if you haven't done that prerequisite work on yourself, like I said in the beginning, to know who you are according to your faith, what is your primary identity, and how do you move in this life, what informs you, how do you engage with the world, you're not thinking on that level, and then you're suddenly trying to meet another person and get to know them and figure them out. It's very confusing. There's a lot of great, it'll facilitate your knowledge or your the health of your relationship to work on yourself first and to know those things about yourself first. And so very important point that you work on prioritizing what your needs are. And that's not a selfish, it sounds kind of like nafsi, right? Like, oh, you should know. No, it's a matter of communication, because if you don't know what those needs are, then you may do all these things that we've already talked about, which is you minimize yourself, you don't speak up, and then it causes a lot of miscommunication in the relationship, and so your partner doesn't know what's going on because you're changing, and you're in your own head thinking that this is how you should, you should be, maybe because you've heard messages from society or your family or culture that tell you have to do this and this and this. But my thing is always, what does our, and again, I'm speaking because this is, we're Muslims, or the majority of people maybe in the room Muslim. I think we've opened it up to everybody, so we might have a mixed bag here, but at least for those who are believers in our faith, we prioritize self knowledge and knowing one's identity, and then everything else will fall into place. But if we're not doing that, and we're bypassing that part of our own individual spiritual journeys, and then trying to come into a relationship where we have to manage another person's ego and nafs, why do you think we're taught that marriage completes half your faith? Because it can really test you. But so we have to be prepared before we enter that relationship. And that requires a lot of introspection and work on yourself, and also empowerment, because God made you, a very, He made us all unique. He made us individuals, and we should be very grateful to Him for all of those qualities that we have, and make sure that we have the confidence to present that in a relationship, so that our partner honors us in that way and doesn't see us as someone that they need to control or dictate. And we come on an equal level playing field, which is very possible in a sound marriage, and the roles that we play will be different because we have specific roles. But in terms of the value we offer and the importance of our needs, we should come as equal partners, and that is an ideal, healthy Islamic marriage, right? So
I do want to add,
yes,
really
please.
quickly,
Sure, of
that
course.
a lot of men marry really young women, again, thinking that they're never going to change. Like you mentioned earlier, that men normally marry women hoping that they'll never change. But when you marry somebody that's that young, that doesn't even know who she is yet, her brain hasn't even fully developed, she doesn't even know how to speak and advocate for herself yet, there will be trouble in the marriage 10, 20 years down the road, because as she becomes herself, as she feels more empowered, as she becomes a mom and feels stronger and strengthened, she will change and speak up for herself. And if you're a man and you're not realizing this, and you're not recognizing that this person that you married at such a young age is going to grow and change, you're fooling yourself. You should expect that this person's going to become a woman one day, and she's going to have her own opinions, and you should encourage that. But it is usually a very insecure man that can't handle a woman that has her own opinions.
Absolutely.
We have in our own religion, and our own Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had arguments and discussions with Aisha, and so he allowed her to be herself. He allowed her to express herself. But yet a lot of our men in our community don't want that. They want somebody that's very submissive, very quiet. She kind of knows her place and stays in her place. But also, as a woman, when you're stuffing your feelings and you're stuffing your needs, it creates a lot of resentment. And over time, that's going to create a huge wedge in that relationship. If your goal is to have a healthy relationship where you communicate, and it's a partnership, and it's a deep, secure bond, that stuffing your feelings and not talking about your needs and ignoring your needs is not going to lead you to a healthy marriage.
Absolutely. And this point about, again, men who are in any way, inshallah, all of us, all of both men and women should be working to try to emulate the Prophet ﷺ as much as possible, right? He's our exemplar in every way, which way possible. So we look to him for all of, our character development. But for men specifically, even in marriages and in his relationships, you can see, as Dr. Nafisa pointed out, that he always empowered women, and he was never threatened by empowered women. So these are sometimes cultural ideas that I think we have to start. Also, as a mother of two boys, I certainly do that with my children, that they should be perfectly fine with a woman speaking her mind, and not feel that she's somehow so masculine, because that's unfortunately the equivalence that is often put to women, that as soon as you speak up, you're acting out of place, you're acting out of line, you're not feminine. And this goes back to knowing about, emotional intelligence teaches you that there are, we're not all a monolith, we're not all one, archetype. There is variety in human personality and with men and women, and you want to be attracted obviously to whatever appeals to you, but not to confine people to these to these archetypes that are very limiting, so that a woman is only good if she's this demure, soft, soft-spoken, very silent, quiet, no, just never speaks up kind of woman. That's a very cultural view, and that is not consistent in Islam, because again, you will see time and time again women who are very empowered, and this was part of the Prophet's mission from the very beginning until the very end. He empowered women and obviously everything in between. But of course, we have adab, and so there's a way to be vocal that is also part of our faith that is taught, where you have, you're respectful, and that you can certainly speak your mind, but you don't want to compromise your own principles to do so. So make sure that you're doing that within, again, that concept of adab. So just an important point there. But thank you for mentioning that. So again, for those who are joining, I'm very honored to have Dr. Nafisa Sekandari here. She is co-founder and of Mental Health for Muslims with myself. We both co-founded this website back in 2009, and we published many different articles related to mental health in the Muslim community. This specific article that we're talking about today is the title of this room, 10 Ways to Avoid Marrying the Wrong Person. And it is advice for Muslim singles, but mashallah, the article, which we adapted from another article, it does have universal appeal. So it's been replicated, reproduced by many different websites, including the Huffington Post. And so I hope that those of you who are in the audience who are not Muslims stick around, because we do still have more content to cover. I just wanted to point out again to please follow Dr. Nafisa here on Clubhouse. Her Instagram handle is in her profile. Also follow the club here, as we will inshallah do more classes throughout this week, but also in the coming weeks. So back to the article. We are now on point number 4. So this is avoid opposing life plans. In marriage, you can either grow together or grow apart. Sharing a common purpose in life will increase the chance that you will grow together. You must know what the person is into. In other words, what are they ultimately passionate about? Then ask yourself, do I respect this passion? Do I respect what they are into? The more specifically you define yourself, your values, beliefs, your lifestyle, the better chance you have of finding your life partner, your soulmate, the one you are most compatible with. Remember, before you decide who to take along on a trip, you should first figure out your destination. So, figuring out yourself, and we've kind of touched on this already, this self-actualization, the self-knowledge, self-awareness is such an important prerequisite to the topic of marriage. And this is why there is now, I think, more and more, advice against marrying too young or too early, because we need sometimes time to figure things out and to live life and have some life experience that teaches you and helps you to become a better partner once you're ready for the topic of marriage. But this discussion about, life plans is really important. As I mentioned in the very beginning, like something that a lot of people don't think about is where you want to live. If you in your mind are meeting someone in your specific locality and you think that this is going to be the place that you settle and plant your roots, that discussion has to be had, because maybe your partner is not of that mindset. Maybe they are only here temporarily and they actually do want to travel or live somewhere else, or they have another life plan that they need to share with you and disclose with you, which is also really important. And I'll address now the brothers, because I've seen this happen to a lot of sisters, and I think it's really unfortunate. If you have a plan to move with your family, with your parents, if that's your responsibility in your specific family dynamics or amongst your siblings, that's your life plan. Like, I will eventually be the one who's going to take care of my elderly parents or have them live with me, or that's in the works. You have to disclose that information to someone you're speaking to. It's not fair to manipulate people into a relationship because you're afraid of disclosing that, and then think like, oh, somewhere down the line, after she's already in love with me and she's kind of already in the relationship, she'll have no choice. And I've seen people actually do that, and it's horrible. And that's not fair. You have to, be very transparent in the process of marriage with certain things, specifically things that are going to impact this other person. And their future and their well-being and their mental well-being and everything. So have full disclosure. And if someone chooses not to accept that plan of yours, then you have to think, is it better to know that now or to go through that headache later on, where it causes it can absolutely lead to the end of a marriage. And I've seen that happen as well, where this type of, life plan was not shared, and then it eventually led to the dissolution of the marriage. So really important point there, but also Like I said, if you have any plans for the future that are going to impact your relationship, you should share those things. If you want to quit your job and retire at a certain point and then go and live in the mountains, you got to tell your partner that. You can't just be like, well, this is what I always wanted, and then let them know halfway into the relationship, because it's just, it doesn't work like that. Life doesn't work like that. But some people can get very fixed on their own specific dreams or life goals, not factoring in that there are other lives now, at stake. And you can't just, you're not a bachelor or a bachelorette. You have to live as a couple, and that means consequences for your decisions that are beyond you. So thinking about that and making sure that we're being very open in terms of disclosing those things to our partners or potential partners. So anything to add to that, Dr. Nafisa? We are still on point number 4 here.
Yeah. It makes me think of, I recently, a couple of months ago, I did a podcast interview with Saba Malik, who talks about her diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And she talks about how difficult that is in our cultures to have a diagnosis and ask and be in the prospect of marriage, right? She needed to get married. And so she had been married before her marriage fell apart. And then so with the next husband, she did not want to hold back. She didn't want to pretend that she didn't have a mental illness. A lot of her family members are like, don't tell him, let him just marry you, and then he'll find out. And then, like you said, he has no choice, or he'll learn to love you, whatever. She said, no, I'm not going to do that. Her family lost a lot of friends once she got diagnosed. She lost a lot of prospects once she was diagnosed. People did not want anything to do with bipolar. They didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. But her husband said, when she said, you know what, very first time she met him, she said, I'm diagnosed with bipolar. And he said, so what? That was the man for her. And he has continued to be so supportive and so loving towards her, despite her diagnosis of bipolar. And that applies for everything. We're so afraid of what we're going to lose, but do you really want to be with somebody that doesn't know the real issue, and then later on it feels like they're trapped? Do you really want to be in that kind of relationship? So I would say, if you don't want to have children, for example, I know a lot of people that don't want to have kids, and they pretend like they do, and then later on they will admit that they don't, and then that marriage falls apart. I also have another podcast coming up in a couple of weeks. It's all about divorce. And the statistics that this woman shares, the staggering number of people that are getting divorced, it's going above 50% now for the general population, but the Muslim community is catching up really quickly. And it's because of these lies that we tell our partners. We're not on the same page when we want to get married. We're not honest about whether we don't want to have kids, or where we want to move, or whether we want to take care of the in-laws. All of that is so important to put on the table right away. And if that guy or that woman says, that's not for me, lovingly let them go, because that wasn't meant for you. That is not the right partner. And you're blocking your opportunity of finding the right partner by forcing something that's not supposed to be yours to become yours, because you're afraid that you're not going to find anybody else. So putting it out on the table and being honest about it is so important, and it will create lasting connections and for the right person, instead of trying to make the wrong person fit into your life.
Wow. Very well said. Thank you so much, Dr. Nafisa. Beautiful. So again, just a quick reset. We are now on point number 5. For those of you who are joining, we're reading from an article called the room title here, 10 Ways to Avoid Marrying the Wrong Person. So point number 5 is actually really important also. And, keep in mind, please, that we wrote this article back in 2010. And I know from just anecdotally listening to different people that the scene has changed so much since even then, or since when I was a single. But point number 5 is avoid premarital sexual physical activity. And this is important. Again, we're living in a time where it's a hypersexualized society. Things are very rampant. And even in the Muslim community, I've heard of these things occurring, very normalized now, to have hookups. It's just, for those of us who are on the Gen X side or older, that's shocking. I'll be honest with you. It's shocking because we didn't, this idea was never normal before. And now that people are, we've moved from dating to now having hookup culture in the Muslim community, or sexting. It's just really shocking. But we have to address these things head on and realize, or at least let people know that while it may obviously physically cater to whatever needs that you have, there are ramifications, spiritually speaking, but also emotionally and what have you. So let's go ahead and dive into this. So avoiding premarital sexual physical activity. Recognize that there is incredible wisdom in why God has ordered us to refrain from intimacy before marriage. They are to prevent great harms, as well as to keep sacred what is the most blessed part of a relationship between a man and a woman. Aside from the obvious spiritual consequences, when a relationship gets physical before its time, important issues like character, life philosophy, and compatibility go to the wayside. Consequently, everything is romanticized and it becomes difficult to even remember the important issues, let alone talk about them. Intellectual commitment must be established before emotional or sexual commitment. And so this is, again, such an important point. I have seen so many devastated souls fall apart because they gave in to some pressure that was placed on them to get intimate before commitment was made. And they thought, again, this false idea that this person is going to commit to me, they are going to marry me. And so they give of themselves, only to be left, abandoned, neglected. And not only that, as cruel as this may sound, but some people take it to the level of weaponizing that information against that person. So it's absolutely treacherous and horrible and just tragic. But I've seen this happen to many people, and I'm sure Dr. Nafisa has as well, that this leads to can absolutely lead to breakdowns. Like people have just don't know what to do because it's such an emotional thing, right? You're talking to someone, they're like love bombing you, like Dr. Nafisa said. They're just putting all of this pressure on you and gaslighting you, making you feel like your love is inadequate because you're not giving them of your physical self. And so it's actually it's a coercion, right? They're coercing you into doing this, and you do it because there's this idea that it's okay. I don't want to lose this person. So there's this fear of losing them. And there's this false sense of security that, well, they've been talking to me and they love me. They keep telling me they love me. So inshallah, it'll be fine because we'll be in a halal relationship soon when we do our nikah or when we have our marriage. And all of these, when we, looking into the future with no commitment, no actual concrete evidence that this person is in it for the long haul, you give yourself, and the next thing you know, that is only, it has it doesn't last. As we said in the beginning, nuance is exciting. Nuance excites people, right? It's human nature. But as soon as something loses that nuance, then it just becomes stale. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with predatory behavior, predators, this is how they act. They'll discard you as soon as you're no longer new and exciting. But they'll tell you everything you want to hear before that, and just to get what they want out of you, and then they drop you. And so I've seen way too many people victims of this, and they fall apart because now, as I said, they're left to feel, what is wrong with me? Why wasn't I good enough? And this is, now a spiritual attack, because Shaitan will absolutely flood you with those thoughts. Like there's something wrong with me, and he can fixate you on your physical appearance or something else. But there will be this total preoccupation with, I wasn't good enough for this person because I gave them the best of what I had to give them, and it still wasn't good enough. So can you imagine what kind of a mental and emotional, horrible attack that is on someone who's vulnerable and fallen into this, that now all of that toxicity they put on themselves and they can't move forward because they're convinced that they didn't have something that this person wanted. And that's why they left. And it's not about, oh no, their character sucked, they should never have asked you to do that in the first place. If they had any respect for you whatsoever, if they had any value for you, they would have never dared to ask of you that, because men who truly are in relationships for commitment are so afraid of losing you that they would never take a risk like that. But a man who's in it to play, a player, is there for his fulfillment. He's just there for his satisfaction, and he'll say whatever it takes. So we have to be able to identify who's a predator and who's actually committed, and know that not to get those the wires crossed, because they will say things that will emotionally confuse you. But you as a woman have to go back to, why did God prevent us from doing this? Because he knows that we give so much of our heart in these situations, and that we will be taken advantage of. And so incredible wisdom there. But I'd like to hear from Dr. Nafisa on this point.
So I know your audience is mostly Muslim, and we are talking to mostly Muslim people here. But for me personally, I work with all kinds of people from all different backgrounds. Even my patients in my practice are not all Muslim. So I come from a holistic, integrative perspective, and I try to include Islamic teachings, but it's not always going to be necessarily from an Islamic perspective. And a lot of Muslims don't want to hear about shaitan and about this being a religious taboo. But let's talk about this as a universal message. I'm a big believer in energy medicine. And when we're exchanging sexual energy with somebody, that stays with us and our energy stays with them. And we are literally giving it away. And if you read, there's a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. It was written in the 30s. And he talks about men in general and how when they're randomly giving away their sexual energy, they're not going to be successful in life because they're not channeling that energy into something productive. So that's like written in the 30s. Again, Steve Harvey and Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man. He will say, give any relationship a 90-day pause. Do nothing sexual, not even kissing, nothing. Just talk to each other and get to know each other for 90 days. He's like, if my job will not give me insurance until I'm worthy of it, why are we giving ourselves away until somebody is worthy of it? But we're so quick to give that away because we think that's going to get us closer and be connected. I have so many patients, Muslim and non-Muslim. I feel like a Debbie Downer and party pooper in that I'm like, you know what? You've tried having sex with every single person you've met and it hasn't worked out. Why not put it on pause? Why not really get to know each other? And I'm not coming from a religious perspective at this point. Just energetically and for the sake of your relationship, get to know each other, ask the hard questions, because the minute that relationship becomes sexual, even if it's at the basic level of just kissing, what is it, first base? Even if it's at the first base level, all communication ends. All of those important things that you wanted to say will end because you've made it physical. The other book that I recommend for all my patients is a book called The Wait. And this is, Oprah did an interview with this couple. They're a beautiful, gorgeous couple. Megan Good is a Hollywood actress, and Devin Franklin is, I think, a reverend, but he also makes religious type of movies for the African-American community. Beautiful couple, good intentions, but he went on a 10-year, what would you call it, celibacy. For 10 years, he did not go out with anybody. He didn't want to have anything to do with sexual relations, and he just really wanted to focus his energy, but he wanted to find the right person. Megan Good, on the other hand, was out there getting drunk all the time, having sex with everybody, getting in trouble, one bad relationship after another. On her own, she decided, I'm just going to take a break from men and just focus on myself and not get into any relationships. And it happened that around that time, they were doing a movie together, and it's called Jumping the Broom. The movie's not that good, but the relationship, the fact that they met each other through that was really cool. And so they come together, and it was the perfect timing because they were both on the same path. And in the interview with Oprah, they talk about how difficult it was to wait, but how gratifying it was that they finally waited until marriage. Their whole thing was waiting until marriage. So we're so used to hearing about how Muslims were not supposed to have sex before marriage. It's not good. And so you hear it so much that you're like, yeah, whatever, but all my friends are having sex and they're okay. And so you end up questioning yourself and what your goals are because everybody else around you is doing it. But what you're not realizing is that there is actually a trend towards waiting now. A lot of people are actually sick of it. And I'm talking about my non-Muslim friends, not friends, but my non-Muslim patients, trying the whole meeting people, having sex, hoping that relationship's going to work, and it's not working. And so they're like, I need to do something else. I have patients that are very religious and want a church-going guy. They want somebody that's on the same page with them. They want to have a long-term relationship. But these guys, they go to these churches knowing that these good girls are in there waiting, and they're predators, basically. They go and they pretend to be religious. They pretend that they value it as much as they do, talk them into having the sexual relationship. And then as soon as they get what they want, they do the gaslighting, the lying, and then they cheat on them. They do other things, and then that relationship falls apart. So we wanted to focus on that. Even back 12 years ago, 11 years ago, we knew that was a big thing that we were saying, because a lot of people would have laughed at us. Like, oh, going, you guys are such prudes. This is not the modern times. People are having sex left and right. Why are you even putting it on there? But I truly believe that that is going to be the future, in order to help us really understand ourselves, understand the other person, in order to have long-term healthy connections. Otherwise, if you're into having casual sex, that's fine. But as far as energy medicine goes, as far as the exchanging of energy goes, just know that that one night stand is not just a one night stand. That person will stay with you for the rest of your life, and you will remember them, because that energy was exchanged, and you're depleting yourself one way or another. So I don't want to get on my prudish high horse and talk more about that, but there's a reason I'm so passionate about this. I've seen way too many patients burn up and get exhausted from these relationships, and doing it differently. And I'm recommending everybody read The Weight and watch the Oprah episode, because there's so much wisdom in that.
Absolutely. And these are, again, very, I wish we had, I think we need a whole event just on this particular topic, because in the age of, as we mentioned, it's such a hypersexualized society that we live in. And this is forced down our throat literally everywhere you go, in film, television, music. You cannot escape this topic. And so a lot of single people are obviously, they have their own biological needs, physiological needs. So they're feeling almost, pushed into that direction. But we have to, cool our heads a little bit, go back to our faith, and realize that these are wisdoms that, that we have to trust what our Lord knows about us. He's the one who created us. And when he tells us that when we prematurely enter these very intimate, complex, outside relationships outside the boundary of marriage, we are going to harm ourselves. And of course, that has a ripple effect into the community and the wider society. And that's what we see. Look around you. You look around you and tell me, is it convincing that this is the way to go, to have this open, free sort of society where everybody just kind of does whatever they want and they move about? Is it showing any positive, effects in our society at large? Or are we seeing the increase in pornography addiction? We're seeing more and more, just depraved behavior around this topic, where people's appetites are just insatiable, and it's growing into something that is almost like, at what point does it end? We see, so much, again, proliferation of the most toxic and perverse concepts around sexuality that is just everywhere now. Whereas in our tradition, there are boundaries, because it is something very beautiful, and it's something very mutually beneficial. But if it's presented the way that it is in our modern society, then it serves the needs of certain people over others, and it's depraved, and there's no emotional or spiritual real emphasis. It's a totally physical, almost animal act, and it leaves people really left with devastating effects. So we have to address these things. But really important topic. Maybe we'll just have to consider doing a whole topic on that, because I've seen so many people on the other side of it really struggling. And even, for example, I know people who have given in to their desires, had premarital relations, and then even after marriage, from a spiritual perspective, it really weighs on them, because they will start to think that everything that goes wrong in their life is a result of that kind of stuff. So it's really hard to just divorce yourself from these things. It's, it's not something that you're just going to forget, because in the moment it's like it's over and then you move on. No, the memories stay with you. The thoughts stay with you. This idea of attributing your problems in life, it will come to you, and you see a lot of, it's like it plagues you. So these are clear spiritual ramifications that people are not taught about, and we're just forced into focusing on the physical pleasure of it. But like with everything, these things are fleeting, right? With every pleasure, you cannot sustain it. There's no sustaining it for a long time. So just think about these things and be mindful, and watch out for your own spiritual well-being and emotional and mental health, because these things absolutely play on it. So anyhow, All right, we'll just do a quick reset here because we still have 4 more points to go through. We've been here, mashallah, over an hour here. So thank you for those who are joining. I am very honored to have Dr. Nafisa Sekandari here. She is the co-founder, along with myself, of Mental Health for Muslims. We wrote an article, which is the title of this room, and we are reading through this article, hoping to offer some benefit to those who are single and looking to get married, to just think about these things on a deep level, and to entertain ideas that are maybe not very popular or go against the status quo, which we just covered in terms of avoiding premarital sexual physical activity. So now we'll go into point number 6, which is avoid lack of emotional connection. And so here, I'll just read. There are 4 questions that you must answer yes to. Do I respect and admire this person? Okay, so if you are talking to someone for marriage, maybe take note of these 4 questions and really think about them deeply. Do I respect and admire this other person? And what specifically do I respect and admire about them? Do I trust this person? Can I rely on them? Do I trust their judgment? Do I trust their word? Can I believe what they say? Do I feel safe? So I'm sorry, there's multiple questions in these questions. So the first one was, do I respect them? The second is, do I trust them? The third question is, do I feel safe? Okay. So do I feel emotionally safe with this person? Can I be vulnerable, right? Can I be myself? Can I be open? We spoke about this, the importance and the necessity of being vocal in a relationship. If you cannot answer that question affirmatively, that's a problem. It's a red flag, right? Do I feel calm and at peace with this person? So these are the 4 questions. Do I respect them? Do I trust them? Do I feel safe? Do I feel calm and at peace with this person? If the answer is, I don't know, I'm not sure, keep evaluating until you know for sure, because it's going to be either yes or no. And try to listen into that, we have a sixth sense. We have that, all of us have that mechanism. It's just sometimes we don't trust our own instincts, which is why also it's so important. And I don't know if we necessarily addressed it in this list, but if you're not sure of your own, maybe because of your own relationship history, or your own ability to read people, and you're not quite sure, it is so important to have allies and people that you can turn to that can help you gauge, the person. You should have someone, a wingman, wingwoman, someone in your corner that you trust their judgment, that they have objectivity, and that they can really see things for who they are. And I actually recommend couples. I recommend having a couple that has a model and healthy relationship, because you want to hear from both your friend, if you're a female, and her husband, or if you're a male, your friend, the brother and his wife, because having a different gendered experience or a perspective is also important in these conversations. So if you're not sure of your own ability to assess someone's character, or to know whether or not these things are if you're not confident in your own ability, then turn to someone or a couple that can help you, inshallah. So any thoughts to add to this, Nafisa?
I think I'll go back to we said we need to find somebody that's consistent and reliable, that makes you feel calm, that makes you feel at peace, because that's not going to trigger your anxiety. But I would also recommend, again, to go watch the Joy Luck Club. There's so much wisdom, because it's all about these women going through these horrible relationships back in China, and then trying to help their daughters make better decisions when it comes to marriage. I know that it's not widely available. I ended up watching it on Hoopla Digital, which is through the library. If you in the United States, if you have a library card, and you can tie Hoopla Digital, which is an app, to your library card, and they have all of these movies. And the Joy Luck Club is one of them that's available on there right now, all for free. Just use Hoopla Digital for audiobooks as well. I cannot say enough about this free service through the library. There's so many amazing books that you can, The Wait is on there. The audiobook of The Wait is on there. If you want to listen to that, Act Like a Lady and Think Like a Man. There's books from Steve Harvey on there. So check out Hoopla Digital from the library, but find people, pay attention to yourself. But also, I've known so many people, like I just had a patient the other day saying that he's in the process of divorcing his wife. And now everybody's coming out of the woodwork saying, we hate her. We never thought you should have been with her to begin with. She's horrible. She's mean to us. You should have said something when he was getting married to her. But a lot of people feel like, well, they're so happy or they're in the process of getting married, I shouldn't really say anything. But I know I would have wanted to know if I was in that situation. Before you make that mistake, before you make that jump, talk about it. And if they still decide to get married, then they make that decision on their own. But they know that somebody else feels differently about it. And if you're coming from a good place, obviously, if it's a jealousy issue, if there's, I think that's where the difficulty is. You never know where the person is coming from with their warning, right?
Right, right. No, that's a really good point. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because even from the Islamic perspective, one of the areas that we all have to be very mindful about is giving advice when it comes to recommendations for marriage. If someone comes to you and asks you, oh, do you know about so and so, such a person, and you do know concrete information, and this is not conjecture, it's not gossip, it's actual lived real experiences about that person, it is obligatory on you to share it with them, especially if it's going to affect their relationship. Because I, again, cannot tell you, I've heard horror stories. A close friend of mine, unfortunately, this happened to her, where she, met someone for marriage, and his family completely lied to her. They completely deceived her. They hid this person's previous marriages, not one marriage, but multiple marriages. And she found out just within a year, like within 6 months of that relationship, that this man had actually contracted an STD, and he gave it to her. And now she has lifelong health consequences because of that. So he not only lied to her and misrepresented himself as being this religious person, but his family was involved in that as well. It is unbelievable that that kind of stuff occurs, but it does. It happens all the time, because people will go and they'll have their own, they'll sow their wild oats, whatever you want to call it. It's basically jahiliyyah, and they'll entertain whatever desires they have. But then when it comes to marriage, they want, the perfect, idyllic, partner, and the whole, dream sort of marriage situation, not realizing that, are you worthy of that person? Have you, maybe they don't want you, but if you're going to misrepresent yourself and act like you're this pious religious person, worthy of that type of a person, it will come out. I mean, I've had, sisters, alhamdulillah, who's, again, married people on false pretenses or didn't know these things about them. And later on, they find out that they have pornography addiction, sexual addiction, that they were, subscribing to escort services, even in the courtship of the marriage, that they were they were doing all of this stuff. And it's hard to believe that the people in that person's close inner circle were completely unaware of it. But like you said, a lot of people don't feel the need to disclose these things, or they just want to keep, I don't want drama. I want to stay out of drama. I don't want to get involved. I was once asked by a sister about a brother, and she was a good friend of mine. I saw immediate red flags in the stuff that she shared with me. And I just told her, I said, listen, I love you. I care about you. I am just recommending that you not marry this person, because I truly saw a lot of things that were really troubling for me. And unfortunately, she was swept away. The families were already really involved. She just thought it was too late to pull the plug. And this is by Allah. 6 months later, they were divorcing, and I was mediating their divorce. Within 6 months, that's what happened. So if you see red flags and your friends are, and I was married, so I don't think she, was worried that I was jealous. It was just me feeling like real concern for her well-being. But, people have to go through sometimes difficult experiences just for their own growth. So we don't, again, question the decree of Allah. It happened. But the point is I felt the need to tell her, and I've had to do that with others as well. Because I saw real serious red flags. And I think we have to be vocal about these things, especially if you have knowledge of something. If you have knowledge of previous relationships, previous children. I know people who've they hid children, literally hid children, wallahi, from their partner. And then boom, they came out later when that, child, suddenly the mother remarries. And now the guy's like, oops, I forgot to tell you, I had this kid and he needs to live with me. Can you imagine being a newlywed, having no idea that your partner or your husband has a child from a previous relationship, and now you have to be their stepmom? It's a horrible situation, but this is the kind of stuff that happens. So we need to look out for one another and be honest and transparent, and let Allah, let the decree happen as it will. Don't let fear inhibit you from acting on knowledge that's important to your future and well-being. So
I
anyhow,
just want to add to that the person that gets out of it in 6 months is lucky. The
right.
sad thing is being in a marriage and thinking everything's okay. A couple of years later, once you've already established a life and you have finances and you have other responsibilities, and then that marriage falls apart. The another thing from another patient that I learned from is, again, the STD situation, but also they blamed her for having the STD before the marriage. So I cannot stress enough, please get tested. Have a thorough gynecological exam. Make sure that both of you are getting a blood test, that there is no STD to begin with. Have a clean baseline to build from. If there are those issues, talk about it and then decide if you're okay with moving forward. Yes, there are some people that might have an STD, like this poor person that's stuck with it now. That doesn't mean she should never get married again. That wasn't her fault. But for her to be honest and to talk about it and say, this is how it happened. And then the potential spouse to decide at that point whether, yes, I'm okay with it, or no, I'm not okay with it. But be upfront, because you're just putting yourself in another situation. It's not about trapping anybody into a marriage. That's not what marriage should be about. And this is why this article, I think, really resonates with people, because it speaks to all that is wrong with what we're doing right now and the path that we're going when we're making marital decisions. And there is a crisis in the Muslim community, but also universally, there's a marriage crisis. It's not just within our community.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because even in the previous point when we talked about, paying attention to what was avoiding lack of emotional connection, we talked about those questions, right? So important that we also have prerequisites before we even go down this path of committing to someone, which include getting those tests done, and having that as like, I need those, I need to see the records. But also, and I've said this before, premarital counseling, I think, should absolutely be standard practice now in our community, but also in general. I feel like our institutions should not be signing any marriage contracts or giving people, that sense of, like whether it's, in the masjid or what have you, even in our, city halls, there should be some, like, did you guys actually talk to a professional before you're committing? Because on a whim, on desires, on emotions, we're actually quite dangerous to ourselves, right? Which is why the Prophet ﷺ asked, the dua that he made, which is, don't leave me to myself for even the blink of an eye. Because, from a spiritual perspective, and, for those of you who've attended my class, we've talked about this, our nafs, which is our ego, which drives us, is actually our greatest enemy, and it can delude us and it can push us into very dangerous situations. And so when we're leaving ourselves to our whims and desires and our emotions, we're actually quite, there's a lot of consequences to that we might not be thinking about. But having objective people in our life, whether, again, it goes back to having those allies that are in your corner, but also an actual process, a vetting process, a professional process, with whether it's in the masjid with qualified leaders who are trained in this field of being able to give adequate premarital counseling, or you go to a therapist. But to have that as a prerequisite before a nikah a document is even signed, I think will be an incredible deterrent for people who are just trying to play the field and lip service, and there's no real sincerity in their intentions, and it will give reassurance to all of us who are looking to the future in terms of our own children and our youth, that we have these processes in place that will hopefully make the process of marriage better, more holistic, healthier, more sound, because we're holding people accountable. The accountability factor, I think, is a big reason why so many relationships fizzle, fall apart, don't succeed, is because we are rushing into them based on our emotions, and we're not going through actual process that holds people accountable. So it's such an important point. And I'm glad that you brought the testing up. That should be an absolute prerequisite. Require blood work, blood tests, reference lists, and then also premarital counseling, inshallah. So back to the list here. Again, for those who are joining, we are reading from an article that we wrote over 10 years ago called 10 Ways to Avoid Marrying the Wrong Person. This, inshallah, we do plan to have a session for Q&A. I'm sorry, I see people in the queue waiting with their hands raised. Just please be patient. We have a few more things to go through on this list. Maybe we can try to be a little bit more concise, because I want to also respect Dr. Nafisa's time, mashallah, and everyone else here as well. So the last few points here, the next one is pay attention to your own emotional anxiety. So choosing someone you don't feel safe with emotionally is not a good recipe for a long-lasting and loving marriage. Feeling emotionally safe is the foundation of a strong and healthy marriage. When you don't feel safe, you can't express your feelings and opinions. Learn how to identify whether you are in an abusive relationship. If you feel you always have to monitor what you say, if you're with someone who you feel you can't really express yourself with, or always walking around eggshells, then you likely are in an unhealthy, toxic relationship, right? So look for controlling behavior and look for anger issues. And again, this conversation goes for both genders. For the brothers in the audience as well as the sisters, you want to look for this type of behavior. If you feel anxious speaking up, or again, controlling behavior, you're noticing explosive anger, this can sometimes take time to come to light. If you're talking to someone within a few weeks or months, you might not see this behavior. But if you're in it for a little bit longer, which is why I do recommend not rushing into anything, likely people will show their own colors, their true colors, right? You can't sustain a facade for very long. I mean, some people are exceptional actors, we can give them that, but at the same time, you will see hints of their true colors leaking, and so or coming to light. So you want to pay attention for that, and also listen to that internal voice, that sixth sense, that instinct, right? That tells you, that seemed out of character, or that was bizarre, that was weird. Why did they say that? For example, if anyone, and this goes again for brothers and sisters, but if anyone is starting to dictate to you how, and without a commitment, remember, there's, when you're in a committed relationship with someone and someone's taking the time to really get to know you and observe you, and then they're coming from a place of well-meaning intention, and they want to give you advice, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, or dictate to you about certain choices you're making. When it's coming from a place of actual credibility like that, it's accepted. But you just meeting someone and very new into the relationship, and they're already telling you how to dress, who your friends should hang out with, where you should put your money, and what job you should go into, it's very misplaced, right? Because that person hasn't had the time yet to know you, to get to know you, to understand you as a whole person. But if they're already telling you that, oh, you shouldn't do this, and I don't like it when you do this, and they're dictating it to you, I would absolutely say that is a red flag, because there are boundaries that should not be crossed. It's just like with a friendship, right? Just think about a friendship. If you meet someone and you're trying to be friends with them, do you start telling them, these things right away? Or would you wait for that friendship to evolve into a really solid connection where you actually feel invested and you have at least some experience with that person? So again, that's a huge red flag. If you're starting to hear that kind of tone, or any words that even sound like they're trying to dictate to you about what your choices are, and before a commitment is made, there's no engagement, there's nothing, and they're already telling you, oh, I don't like your sister, or I don't like that friend of yours, she's annoying, you shouldn't, don't talk to her, or get off this social media, and I don't want you here. No, that's controlling behavior. And don't be fooled to think that, oh, they're just looking out for me and they care about me. No, it's out of line. They haven't earned that position, right? You earn that with experience and with time and with a commitment. Outside of commitment, you haven't earned that place to tell anyone what to do with themselves. And advice is different. Obviously, giving advice is one thing, but telling someone, dictating to them is what we're talking about. So Dr. Nafisa, anything to say about this?
I just want to emphasize the whole controlling behavior when they start socially isolating you from your family and your friends, and they turn you against the people that are your support system. That is the number one predictor for domestic violence. That's part of the domestic violence circle. And so they have to isolate you emotionally and physically first before they can start controlling you completely. So it's one thing if you are hanging out with bad people or doing things that you shouldn't be doing, and they really genuinely are coming from a good place, but you can tell the difference between that and controlling behavior. It starts with, I don't like that friend of yours. I have this patient who has this amazing granddaughter. She's on her way to becoming a doctor, studied really hard, got straight A's in high school, got accepted into a top program here in Arizona, and met this guy that started isolating her from all of her friends. And again, I'm talking about non-Muslims. So a lot of my patients are non-Muslim, but the same rules apply regardless of religion. She started, anyway, he started controlling her and started like, if she wanted to go to a party, he had to drop her off and he had to bring her back in, um, uh, come back and pick her up, which initially sounds really nice. But he started doing that because, oh, I care about you. And then, oh, I don't like you hanging out with those friends. Eventually, she came down to just her family and him. Well, he ended up making her turn against her brother and made her feel like you're not safe around your brother. Your brother's going to rape you. Your brother's going to hurt you. So then she turned against her brother. She started literally believing him and saying, I can't live in this house with my brother, so I need to leave, move. She turned against her grandmother, who was her biggest supporter. And now he has her all to herself. 19 years old. The guy doesn't even work. He just wants to control her completely. And it breaks my heart that she's so isolated right now. And the grandmother is freaking out because she's been supporting them. She's been raising them all these years. And now she has no say in what happens to her. But unfortunately, that's her path. That's her journey. But when people are trying to help you and stand up for you and say, you should not turn your back on your family because without them, you're unprotected. Listen to them, please. Do not isolate yourself for any guy. No guy that's worth his salt will ever make you do that. And no guy that's worth anything will ever expect that of you. So please know that that's a huge, huge red flag.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to try to, bring it to the other side too. Same with, a sister or a woman. If a woman is doing that to you, right? Isolating any brothers from his family or making, you choose between your mom, your sisters and her. And it's just constant. You feel like, whoa, I'm in between this, these constantly forced into these situations where I have to choose between the two. Those are red flags because we want to always have language that indicates cooperation, that, wanting to meet people in the middle. But when someone is forcing their way and they're using their, being emotionally manipulative to do that, that's certainly something that you want to be worried about and not think of it as, oh, it's just because of love. No, if you love someone, you want the best for them, not the best for you. Right. So really important. Thank you for sharing that. So we have 3 more points here in the article, and we'll go ahead and try to get through the rest so that we can leave it up for Q&A because we do want to hear from you. And I just want to remind everyone again, if you're here, please follow Dr. Nafisa here on Clubhouse. Look at her Instagram handle, check her profile out. You'll find a lot of great content on her Instagram, mashallah, and as well as her website. So look to that, follow the club, Mizan, at the top, inshallah, and you'll get more updates when we do more events. So back to the list. Number 8, beware of lack of openness in your partner. So many couples make the mistake of not putting everything on the table for discussion from the onset. Ask yourself, what do I need to know to be absolutely certain I want to marry this person? What bothers me about this person or the relationship? It's very important to identify what's bothering you, things that concern you, and things you are afraid to bring up for discussion. Then you must have an honest discussion about them. This is a great way to test the strength of your relationship. Bring up issues when there's conflict. Bringing up issues when there's conflict is a great opportunity to really evaluate how well you communicate, negotiate, and work together as a team. When people get into power struggles and blame each other, it's an indication that they don't work well as a team. Also important is being vulnerable around each other. Ask deep questions of each other and see how your partner responds. How do they handle it? Are they defensive? Do they attack? Do they withdraw? Do they get annoyed? Do they blame you? Do they ignore it? Do they stonewall? Do they hide or rationalize? Do they just listen to what they don't just listen to what they say, but watch for how they say it? So the point here is, communication. I mean, I'm sure we all know this. We've heard it probably a million times. Communication is so important in every relationship, but I really do think it is an indicator of whether or not you're with someone who is genuinely, in the relationship for the right reasons. Because I have seen this also play out where, because, in gender differences, we should speak about this because men and women do communicate differently. But a lot of times you'll see a lot of openness coming from women, where we want to talk about things and we want to have, our emotions sort of, just up for discussion or experiences. And you'll see with people's, temperament can also be a factor, but you might be in a relationship with someone who's just not willing to meet you or make an effort to reciprocate, so it's like, I've seen, subhanAllah, in the courtship phase, some sisters send like paragraphs, it's like when you have those questionnaires that, like, what are your interests, what are your tell me about yourself. You'll see the women just flooding the pages with so much information, maybe a lot of extra information, because they really want to be as transparent as possible. But then when you get the brother's response, it's like one word sentence, one sentence phrases, or very, very limited characters, basically, because they just aren't really either interested, or maybe that type of communication is difficult for them. So don't write them off right away, because some people are more verbal communicators as opposed to written. But the point is you got to test these things out, right? Because if you're finding yourself always having one-sided conversations with someone, or they ask you to open up about your life, like sometimes people will ask you these arbitrary questions because they are trying to basically get information out of you. And if you're naive or innocent because you're not aware of their intentions, they may be basically trying to extract information from you to weaponize it later. And I've absolutely seen that happen. Like, what was your biggest regret? It sounds like such a benign question, right? What's your biggest regret in life? But if you're trying to be honest and answer that truthfully, then that could be used against you later to question your judgment. People have done that. It's horrible how some people operate, but it is true that they will take the information you give them, so that kind of, file it away. And then later, when it's an opportune time, they'll use it against you and go, well, you remember you said this about when you were, 18 or 19, you did this thing. How can I trust your judgment? And it's a horrible feeling to have someone use your personal information to attack you. But it absolutely can happen when someone's character isn't, they don't have good character. And so that question where people want to pry is also a red flag, because your past is your past and it has nothing to do with your future partner. And so anybody who just asks you to disclose your sins, for example, like what's the worst thing you've ever done, don't feel compelled to share that unless you've done something that has a consequence that directly impacts them. Like we talked about previous relationships, children's, STDs, things like that. There is nothing that from a spiritual or religious standpoint that forces anyone to disclose past sins to someone. None of their business. And they shouldn't ask you in the first place, right? They shouldn't ask you that type of a question. Some people feel like perfectly within their right to ask, because it's like, well, I've preserved myself and I have this requirement and I want, but the truth is you'll never really know. So it's kind of a futile point. And plus their character should speak for themselves. And if you have to ask that question, then maybe that is the answer, right? Because for some people, I think it seems like you wouldn't even ask that question. It wouldn't occur to you to ask questions about how many relationships do they have in the past? Have they ever done X, Y, and Z? Have they ever done drugs? Maybe because they just don't fit that bill or whatever. But if you're feeling the need to ask that question, then maybe, just think about that, because I just, from a religious perspective, again, there's boundaries that shouldn't be crossed, and asking very direct questions like that about a person's past sins, making them uncomfortable, asking them to unveil themselves, especially if they've done things privately, it's really out of line, and we should veil ourselves and veil other people. So just something to think about. And I think, anything else to add to that? Dr. Nafisa, we're on point number 8.
Yeah, I just want to add that not only can they weaponize that information against you later, but they can also become everything you've said you wanted. When all those texts that you're writing and all the information that you're sharing, they can become that person until the marriage, until the wedding day. They can be everything that you said you wanted in a husband. Even if they don't have that, they can act like they are that until they get married. So be really careful about sharing too much information, because a lot of us, with our innocence and pure intentions, we want to really lay it all out there and be as open and upfront as possible. But sadly, it can be weaponized. It can be used against you, and it can they can pretend to be all the things you've ever wanted just so that they can get you to marry them. So just be careful about what you're sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a really good point. Again, it works for both, right? Both sides. So point number 9 here, beware of avoiding personal responsibility. It's very important to remember no one else is responsible for your happiness. Many people make the mistake of thinking someone else will fulfill them and make their life better. And that's their reason for getting married. People fail to realize that if they are unhappy as a single person, they will continue to be miserable when they are married. If you are currently not happy with yourself, don't like the direction your life is going now, it's important to take responsibility for that now and work on improving those areas of your life before considering marriage. Don't bring these issues into your marriage and hope your partner will fix them. This is what I was alluding to before. It's such an important point because I do think that society and our cultures and sometimes even our family members, especially, and I think this is maybe more the case for women than men, they do pressure women into thinking that we are incomplete as until we get married, and that we won't feel what happiness is until we get married. So a lot of women are conditioned to wait for marriage to give them all of that sense of completion or feelings of fulfillment. And this is very dangerous. It's very dangerous to teach that and to perpetuate that idea, because it's wrong. And you'll actually end up, as we've very blatantly said, bringing in that misery that you have within yourself into the marriage. And now it's two people that are in that situation, right? Misery loves company. So what you want to do is say, I need to work on becoming my own independent, self-actualized person. That doesn't mean that you don't have, sadness, or that, that you're all jolly and perfect all the time or happy all the time. That's not realistic. It means that you see yourself outside of this definition, this very limited view, or of just being, or one-sided view of being a wife and a partner, but more, as we mentioned before, as Muslims, our primary identities are servants of God. That goes for men and women. And that means we have to develop that part of ourselves first, which is, what does that mean? Who am I? Do I know how to worship my creator? Do I know who my creator is? Am I working on becoming the best version of myself before him, right? My character, all those virtues. Am I getting rid of the diseases of my heart? Am I working on trying to align myself with the character of the Prophet ﷺ? Am I forging a path for myself in terms of my professional or personal goals? Am I working on myself? And if you're doing that, and inshallah, you're feeling like you're on that trajectory, then, and you're ready for a relationship, great. But if you're not doing any of those things because you're waiting for life to start once you get married, this is dangerous. This is very dangerous. Life begins at the point of your life beginning, at birth. And we have phases of life. And before marriage, before you introduce another partner or person into your life, and then eventually have children, inshallah, and expand your family, you really want to come into that relationship as a whole person. So give yourself some time to become, the best version of yourself. And then, as we were taught, right, al-mu'min al-mirat al-mu'min, right, that the believer is a mirror for the believer, that can extend into your partner as well. If you want to have a partner with all these wonderful virtues and ideals or idealist characteristics, then you want to also possess those, right? So it works both ways. Work on yourself, and inshallah become worthy of the partner that you want. And continue, of course, to make dua and istikhara and all of that, and do all that legwork on the side to open up your options, but really place a lot of emphasis on self-development outside of being in a marriage or a relationship. And then Allah, inshallah, will facilitate that when the time is right, inshallah ta'ala. So alhamdulillah, we are almost here towards the end now. The last point here is, and I'm sorry, did you want to add anything to that, Nafisa, before I go on? Sorry, I forgot to ask you.
Just want to say, please invest in yourself. Invest in educating yourself, and read the books, listen to our podcasts, take classes, go to therapy, and really work on the issues that you have, so that you become the partner you want to attract. You become all the things that you want to get in a partner. You become those things, so that you can energetically be aligned and you can attract the kind of partner you want. not necessarily being worthy of that partner, but being in alignment with the kind of person that you want to attract and being on the same page. So just invest in yourself, whatever that is, take the time.
I love that. Thank you. Okay, wonderful. So now we're at the last point here, which is watch out for lack of emotional health and availability in your potential partner. Many people choose partners that are not emotionally healthy or available. One huge problem is when a partner is unable to balance the emotional ties to family members. The marriage ends up having 3 or more people in it rather than 2. An example of this would be if a man is overly dependent on his mother and brings that relationship into the marriage. This is no doubt a recipe for disaster. Also important to consider the following: avoid people who are emotionally empty inside. These include people who don't like themselves because they lack the ability to be emotionally available. They're always preoccupied with their deficiencies, insecurities, and negative thoughts. They're in a perpetual fight with depression, never feel good, or isolated, critical, and judgmental. They tend not to have very close friends. So really people who have not shown that maturity of trying to really work on themselves, right? They're just in that negative victim mindset, right? And then any type of behavior that people are still struggling with, if they're working on overcoming, for example, addictive behaviors, whether that's drugs, alcohol, pornography, you want to be supportive of that, but at the same time, make sure that you give them time to figure themselves out. Getting into a relationship prematurely when someone is still working on overcoming really big life challenges like that can distract them from what they need to do, and also create a codependency that may be really unhealthy and unsustainable. So you want to be very careful about things like that, and make sure that the person that you're speaking with, your potential partner, is displaying emotional health. And I think, in culturally speaking, many of our cultures, that can be seen right away when you see how the person interacts with their own family, right? So do pay attention to that, how they are with their parents, with their siblings, and with how they are with your family, and you'll kind of gauge whether or not there's going to be a disconnect, or maybe that person needs some more time to work on themselves. And if they're interested and they're sincere in you and wanting to be with you, then they're up to working on themselves, whatever that means. If that means going into therapy, or working with some program or what have you, then they'll do that necessary work. But give them time, and then just trust that whatever Allah wills for you, you will get it, and whatever He prevents from you, you will not be able to force, right? It's all in His decree. So we have to have trust in that, inshallah. So there is actually more points to this article, but again, because mashallah, we've talked already for now close to 2 hours. I want to be respectful. Dr. Nafisa has given us so much of her time, and we have quite a few people raising their hands. Let's go ahead and stop there, and I'll start to invite people up to the queue. So how I'm going to do it is just some ground rules, because again, time is really limited here. I'm going to bring up 2 or 3 people at a time. We'll go in PTR order. I'd like everyone to please keep their comments to 1 to 2 minutes maximum, please. And inshallah, anything that you want to cover or want us to readdress that maybe we've already talked about, please remember we are recording this, hopefully, and there will be a podcast that Dr. Nafisa will post on Instagram with this talk. So don't worry, the information, the references, the books that she mentioned are all going to be contained in that. So please keep on topic as well. So let me go ahead and invite.
Can I say something really quick?
Of course, please.
So I did compile the entire article into a beautiful PDF guide that they can download for free when they go to transforminganxiety.com/resources. You can go over there right now and download your free copy. It has all of the points. It has the entire article with all of its messages, beautifully compiled together, so you can have it with you and refer to it as often as you need to, because sometimes we need reminders and we need to refresh our memory about the things we should be doing, because when we get caught up in a new relationship, we throw the book out the window and say, forget it, I'm in the right relationship, without really stopping to see or look for the red flags.